One of the
Coming up
things
on
that we give
Unleash
that's very
Thyself.
tangible is we tell you if you have increased nutrient needs, and we can tell you if you have a tendency to have higher or lower levels of different hormones. And so the good thing about that is that that's something we can easily test, right? And toxins is another one. And so many times I've been through with someone and said, look at that, you got an increased need for vitamin D. You've got an increased need for, an amino acid like glycine. You've got an increased need for magnesium, whatever it might be. And then we test it, and sure enough, those are the things that they're showing as being deficient in, even though they're eating a normal diet in many cases. Sometimes even though they're eating more than average, but they're still deficient.
Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome to Unleash Thyself, a podcast where we journey into the depths of personal transformation, spirituality, and growth. I'm your host, Konstantin Morur, and today we welcome Elwin Robinson. Alwen is the founder of Genetic Insights, an easy-to-use, direct-to-consumer platform that allows people to upload their raw DNA data from any Ancestry service. You can get access to over 350 reports with insights on health risks, nutritional requirements, allergies and intolerances, sensitivities, and even personality traits. These reports are extremely accurate and include personalized recommendations unique to your own DNA. Now, Alwen is also passionate about helping people reverse the effects of premature aging. When he was in his 20s, he felt like he was a 60-year-old man, and now at 43, he feels like he's a 20-year-old man. And we'll dive into that in a second as well. So I'm excited as I read through this. And it's like the fifth time I read through it. I'm like, man, so many questions come up. But one last thing I want to add before I pass it over to you. You have a beautiful podcast too. It's called the Rejuvenate podcast. But also your website, feelyounger.net, are dedicated to providing people with resources, both educational and practical, to help them feel younger. So with that, Alwen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's very exciting to be on.
Yes. Oh my God, there's so much cool stuff that we can talk about. I'll ask you a question right away, and you touched in your bio on this. You say the results are extremely accurate. How do we define extremely accurate? Are we talking, 90% plus, 99% plus? Can we take this to the doctor and say, well, Alwen is saying this. How can we prevent this from happening?
Let me answer the last question first. Can you take it to a doctor? Yes. Our reports are so scientific that you can take it to a doctor. It's not like most alternative things. It kind of bridges alternative with actual mainstream science and medicine. We have reports. The bio I gave you is actually out of date. It's over 500 reports these days.
Wow.
And it's risks. It's risks of hundreds of different health conditions. It's if you have an increased or reduced need of any of the 60 plus nutrients that human beings need, if you have a risk of any kind of allergies and intolerances, if you have a difficulty with dealing with any specific toxin, we have reports on that. We have reports on personality traits. But yeah, the biggest thing is health risks of all kinds of health problems. Our reports are, although the FDA and FTC doesn't check anything, it is compliant with that. So meaning, pretty much every sentence in the report has like several scientific citations, like linking to studies that back it up. So to answer that original question, yes, you can give it to a doctor. Now, will the doctor listen? I can't guarantee anything. Some doctors, even if you say to a doctor, the other doctor told me this, they would say, oh, I don't care about that, right? So some doctors won't listen to anyone. But reasonably open-minded doctors, and they only have to be reasonably open-minded, not very open-minded, they will look at it. That is my experience. And we work with several medical doctors who, use our platform all the time. We're a fairly new company, so that's why it's only a few. But yeah, absolutely. Now, to go back to the other thing that you said about extremely accurate. So how do I define that? I mean, we say we have a 99.7% accuracy, and what that means is that the way that we process the genome is, extremely accurate. Now, in terms of the actual human experience, though, like me and you, what we tell you is we tell you risk, and in some cases, like other things like need or type. But our type of reports are based on what are called SNPs. So SNPs, it stands for single nucleotide polymorphisms. And what that basically is like one single variation in this string of genetic code. So yours might be AGTCA and mine might be AGTCC. So that one different letter at the end there between me and you, yours is A, mine is C, that's called a SNP. Does that make sense so far? So it's like
Yes.
one little difference. Okay. So that doesn't change throughout your lifetime. You're born with that SNP, you have it your whole life, and you die with that SNP. So that's why we can't tell you you definitely have this or you definitely don't have this or anything like that, because of course there are not, I mean, there are a very small portion of things that you are born with and you have your whole life when it comes to, you know, disease based on genetics. But the vast majority of stuff, the stuff that most people suffer with, your, you know, heart disease and your diabetes and all that kind of stuff, that's stuff that may or may not develop during your life. Does that make sense?
Of course, yeah.
So what we say is we give you a risk score in most cases. So we can't guarantee that you will or won't have it. Now, with a lot of them, we are able to even give a percentage risk score. And so what I've observed, I've worked with a lot of people now, and I can say I've worked with a lot of people who are in the same position that I was a few years ago, really struggling with their health. They've tried everything, nothing's worked, no one's able to provide the answers, and we can often help them. But I also work with a lot of people who are influencers and authorities in the health sphere. So they are, you know, fitness gurus, they are, you know, nutrition gurus, whatever it might be. And the bottom line is they've been very dedicated for a healthy lifestyle for a long, long time. So they're kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. And when I work with them, I'd say with most people who are, let's say, normal people who are not completely dedicated to health, by the time they're in their mid to late 30s or 40s, when I look through their health reports and I look at the reports that have the highest risk score, like where there's the highest chance that they'll get it, I go through the list and they're like, yep, I got that, I got that, I got that, I had that, you know, like I sometimes get that. Like, so it's very, very accurate when I work with those people. They're blown away. They're like, wow, how does it know? Now, when I work with the gurus who are the same age, who've been, you know, very invested in their health and wellness for, you know, 10, 20 years, it often seems less accurate. I go through and I'm like, you have a very high risk for this. They're like, no, I don't have it. Or, yeah, not really. And so I always worry because I'm like, oh no, they're going to think that our system doesn't work. But I kind of try and explain this to them. And our reports don't only give risk scores, they also give, in fact, the majority of the report is recommendations. Because again, just because you have a higher risk of something genetically doesn't mean that you will definitely get it. But it also doesn't mean you can't do anything about it. If all we could do is provide you risk scores, then I would not be in this because that's disempowering. I'm like, you're probably going to get heart disease. Oh, that's, you know, how does that help you? But if I can say you have a higher risk than average of getting heart disease, but here are all the things you can do. And all the recommendations are things that are specific to your DNA. So while some of it is general advice that anyone might give you, some of it is very specific stuff you may not have even heard of. And so when I go through that list of recommendations, and they are listed in order of priority, so the top ones are the most important. And when I go through that list with the influencers, the people who are really, really dedicated to health, they say, oh yeah, I'm doing that. I'm doing that. I'm already doing that. I've been doing that for 10 years. I've been doing that for, and so I can see the correlation between people who have been doing the recommendations for a long time and they haven't manifested the issue, even though they're in their 40s, let's say on average, versus the people who are kind of more normal people who are not doing all these health things all the time, who usually have manifested the issue. And I can say, when I see a high risk score, like top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5%, something like that, the person, as I say, with few exceptions, they have had it. Like for me, I'll just give one example. If I look at my list there, right at the top is sinus problems. It's like top 2%, I think, most likely to have sinus issues. So meaning in a room of 100 people, me and someone else, we would be the most likely to have it statistically, right?
Yeah, me and you, because I have it too.
Okay, there you go. Me and you, our room of 100 people. And so what does that mean? It doesn't mean that I'm definitely going to have it, but what it means is this. If I'm not perfect, if I'm not at my highest level, so meaning if I have stress for too long, if I miss too many nights sleep, if I eat badly for too long, or whatever it might be, that's where it will show up for me first, or one of the first places. For somewhere else, it may show up as digestive issues. For someone else, it may show up as an allergy. For someone else, it may show up as a headache. For someone else, it may show up as a UTI. For someone else, it might show up as ankle pain. And yeah, it is that specific. We have a report on all of those things and many, many more. And some people, it shows up in ways that we don't think of as physical. So for someone else, it might show up as depression. For someone else, it might show up as anxiety. For someone, it might show up as mood swings. For someone else, it might show up as being angry. So, even those things are things that we have scientific reports about. And so, in fact, that's what I found. A lot of people who I meet who are like, I never get ill, I haven't been ill in 20 years or something like that. If I then ask them about their emotional health, there's usually something there. And that's because, these days we've realized that a lot of the time, depression, anxiety, things like that, they're actually not caused by neurochemical imbalances, which is what they used to think and how they used to treat it, whether it's Ritalin, SSRIs, all the rest of it. It's actually caused by inflammation. And so for me, the inflammation shows up in my sinuses, same as you, right? For someone else, it may show up in their joints. For someone else, it may show up in their intestines. And for some people, it shows up in their brain. And then they think that their health is perfect, their physical health, but it just shows up more in a mental or an emotional sense, or maybe it shows up as brain fog, or maybe it shows up as not being able to focus, or having bad short-term memory, or whatever it might be. So basically, we all have a weakest link. And so this helps to identify where it is and then actually give practical advice to resolve it. So to go back to your original question, how accurate is it? Very accurate. One other indication I'll give to you of that is one of the things that we give that's very tangible is we tell you if you have increased nutrient needs, and we can tell you if you have a tendency to have higher or lower levels of different hormones. And so the good thing about that is that that's something we can easily test, right? And toxins is another one. And so many times I've been through with someone and said, look at that, you got an increased need for vitamin D. You got an increased need for, an amino acid like glycine. You've got an increased need for magnesium, whatever it might be. And then we test it, and sure enough, those are the things that they're showing as being deficient in, even though they're eating a normal diet in many cases. Sometimes even though they're eating more than average, but they're still deficient. It's been my experience. And the same with hormones, this shows that you have a high tendency of having an underactive thyroid. We go to the doctor, get it tested. They have an underactive thyroid. Or this shows you have a tendency for high cortisol. Go to the doctor. They have high cortisol. So I see this over and over again, and I realize that's anecdotal. But as I say, our reports are not anecdotal. Our reports are based on this AI system that crunches the statistics from all these different scientific studies and all the rest of it. And then anecdotally, as you asked me, I can tell you that I do see it over and over again.
Oh, it's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, it gives me so much context, and of course our audience as well. And so many thoughts and questions and ideas come to mind, because this opens, in a way, Pandora's box in getting yourself or setting yourself up for a life of success. It could be pain-free, health, whatever you call success in that area, right? And it sounds like lifestyle has a massive impact on how those genes manifest in your life or not, right? That's pretty much what I've heard from you saying that.
Definitely.
And I know you, when I was reading your bio, right, you're talking about how when you were younger, you're feeling like an old man, and now you're feeling like a young man again. How much of what you've discovered here has impacted your life? And can you give us some examples of some changes you've made as a result of your discoveries from the work you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, it's Konstantin here, and I want to take a brief moment to truly thank you for being a part of this incredible journey of transformation. You are the reason we are creating this content. I see you and I appreciate you. Your support truly means the world to me. I want to ask you for a small favor. I'd love for you to join our mission by hitting like, subscribe, or leaving a thoughtful comment or review. Your engagement helps others discover these insights, and together we can continue to unlock the power of authenticity and personal transformation. Thank you for being a part of this movement. Now, back to the episode.
Absolutely. Well, I ended up with quite a serious pain issue just before I turned 40 years old. And it was in my kind of right rib cage area. And before that, I'd been doing what I thought was quite well with health for a good 10 years. I had health issues in my 20s. I cleaned up my act. I quit smoking. I quit drinking. I quit fast food, all the usual stuff. And that's the short version. And then I did well. But at the age of 39, almost 40, I started to get this stabbing pain. and it was really bad, and it would be bad in certain positions, and it would also be bad if I ate a lot of different foods, and also stress would make it worse. So 3 different triggers for it. And so I didn't really know what the cause of it was. I was kind of quite familiar with traditional Chinese medicine. So, right area, like around the rib cage, you think of liver. And I went to a normal medical doctor first. In fact, I went to several. I went to a GP, we call it over here, and then I went to a private doctor as well that specializes in it. And I had an MRI and CT scan and bloods and endoscopy and all of this kind of stuff, and they could not find anything wrong. And then I tried, and the problem was I realized I think it's over half of people over 40 have chronic pain, so this is not unusual. But there was something unusual about this pain, which is that painkillers were completely ineffective. And there are some pains like that, but usually in that case, what they do is they put you on opioids. That's like the last case resort. But the crazy thing with this type of pain is that opioids actually made it significantly worse. So there was actually no painkiller that's effective. Even the strongest, opioids would be something I would avoid like the plague. Not because they're addictive; they just didn't work. They just made it significantly more painful. So that wasn't an option for me. So this was a pain I couldn't escape. I guess that's the short version of it. And so I tried medical stuff. I tried alternative stuff, like nutritionist, functional medicine, all that kind of stuff. Then I thought, well, maybe it's a structural issue. So, osteopath, chiropractor, craniosacral, physical therapy, all of that kind of stuff. None of that worked. Then I thought, well, maybe it's an emotional issue because stress makes it worse. So I got into therapy and meditation and spiritual practices and breath work and all of that kind of stuff. And that didn't help either. And at that point, I'd kind of worked on pretty much every level, right? The physical, mental, emotional, structural, dietary. Like I felt like, I tried every avenue and nothing was working. And, I've been suffering for a long time. Oh, and by this time, I'm 6'3". Because it was so painful to eat, I had lost a lot of weight and I was down to like about 120 pounds. So I was,
Oh wow, that's low.
I was pretty emaciated, at least for someone who's not trying to be emaciated. I was trying to eat, but I was, and when you're that underweight, you also, I felt cold all the time, and I had this massive level of anxiety that being built up, I guess, because of constantly being in pain. So I was in a pretty bad state, whilst simultaneously, the doctor not being able to find anything wrong with me. as bad as it gets without.
That's disempowering right there. Right? Like that's probably makes you wonder if you're going crazy or if if something is. If they can't find anything, that's wow.
Okay. That happened early on. I was like, okay, maybe it's all in my head. So that's why therapy and emotional work and all of that kind of stuff, right? But again, that didn't help either. It helped on all of the stuff I did helped on some level, but nothing resolved it, right? So then I found out about the genetic stuff and offering a similar service to ours, and I just tried it, and so it pointed out a few things to me based on my genetics that I didn't know, all of which I then verified, all of which were relevant to this pain. And in fact, they're related to things I said. So one of them is a nutrient issue, one of them is a toxin issue, and one of them is a hormone issue. So in terms of the nutrient issue, so your liver produces this fluid called bile.
Yes.
You may have heard of bile. So bile is considered a digestive juice, and it does help you digest fats. But bile is actually also the primary way that your body transports toxins out of your body. So your liver processes poisons more than the other centers, poisons, toxins, same thing. And then your liver doesn't have a hole to spit it out. So the only hole that it has, any way that it get those toxins out, is it puts the toxins in the bile. Then the bile brings the toxins to the gallbladder. Then the gallbladder puts it in the duodenum. Then the small intestine, then the large intestine, then you poop it out. So this poison's got quite a journey to get out. Now, this bile is supposed to be pretty fluid, but if you are deficient in certain nutrients, it can become too thick. And in the medical community, they call that cholestasis. It's where there's, and in Chinese medicine and stuff, they might call that liver stagnation. But it's basically the same thing. The fluid is not flowing. So there's a problem with that. First problem is that your digestive juice isn't flowing, so you're not going to digest properly. Second problem is that poison's not flowing, so it's going to start building up more and more and start backwashing into your blood supply, which is also a problem. And then third problem is that the liver is also in charge of keeping all kinds of other things in the right place, like, for instance, hormones. So I'll get to that in a second. So one of the things that can cause this cholestasis is not enough of a nutrient called choline. Choline used to be considered a B vitamin, but in the end, every vitamin, kind of the definition of a vitamin is it has to be something that your body cannot make itself. And it turned out choline is something that actually our body can make itself, and so they declassified it. It was no longer a vitamin. However, here's the thing. Some people can make it themselves very well, but some people have a genetic variant that means they don't make it themselves very well at all. And so they need 2 to 3 times as much from a diet as the average person. Now, there aren't many dietary sources of choline. This is why I like to mention this as an example. The only things that really contain choline in significant quantities are eggs and also liver. Nuts and seeds, but you really have to have a lot of them. And generally, most people don't digest those very well in large quantities. So it's pretty hard to get enough choline from diet unless you eat a lot of eggs, which most people do. Most people have, several eggs a week, and they're okay. If you have that genetic variant, you probably need at least an egg or 2 a day. But guess how many eggs I'd had for decades? 0. I didn't like eggs. And I was a vegan for a while, and I was a vegetarian when I was younger because that's how my parents brought me up. So basically, I had barely had any eggs, and I had not supplemented any choline. And so it was a major factor that had caused this cholestasis. Now, if this stuff builds up too long, a few different things can happen. You can end up with gallstones. You can end up with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. You can end up with cirrhosis. I ended up with something more unusual called sphincter body dysfunction, which is where this valve that between the gallbladder and the duodenum starts spasming. And basically, it can be painful, but more importantly, like that toxic fluid, bile, doesn't move. And then it gets stuck in the gallbladder and builds up more and more and kind of makes it inflate like a balloon. And that's incredibly painful. And that's sphincter body dysfunction. That's what I was suffering with. And so that's one cause. Now, there was another cause that I found out earlier that I thought was the cause, and it was still a significant factor. So another genetic report said that I don't process the toxic mineral, or heavy metal is usually called, lead, very well. And so I'd seen that before. I'd heard of heavy metals before. I was in the alternative health world for a long time. I'd done a hair mineral analysis before. I think I'd even done a urine heavy metal test. Never seen any levels of lead. But because I got this genetic test, I was like, you know what? I'm going to pay to get a blood test. It's very expensive. It's like over $100 just for the one marker. But I decided to do it. And it turned out the lead level in my blood was sky high. The reference range, meaning what 95% of people have, is 0 to 3. Mine was 27 when I did that first test.
Wow.
And 45 means it's an acute emergency. You have to go to the ICU to get chelation therapy. So I was closer to emergency than I was normal, although I wasn't quite at emergency, which again was true, right? I wasn't dying. I was just suffering all the time. Now, one of the symptoms for lead toxicity is unexplained abdominal pain. So I go to the medical doctor, like, could this explain all my symptoms? Also, the weight loss and feeling cold all the time and, having emotional upheaval, all this stuff. They're all symptoms. And he said, that could be it. I said, what are we going to do about it? He goes, well, we'll retest again in a year. Nothing. Didn't offer any kind of solution, normal medical doctor. But luckily, I managed to find some things that worked. It's not easy to deal with lead as a heavy metal, though. I'll be honest, my levels are still, I think last time I tested was 6, so still double what it should be. But I feel a lot better at 6 than I did at 27, at least.
Of course, yeah.
And so that's one more example. And then the last one I'll give is about hormones. And so I found out in my genetics I have a tendency for my cortisol to be high and then my thyroid hormone to be low. So what does that mean? So cortisol is the stress chemical, and then thyroid is your vitality chemical. That's really how I call it. Thyroid is what tells every cell in your body, the mitochondria in every cell in your body, to create energy, or ATP. And so if you do not have enough thyroid, if you also have low cortisol, then your whole body just slows down. It goes into conservation mode. And people like that will tend to be overweight. They tend to move slowly, think slowly, and just basically everything will be slowed down and they'll tend to gain weight. And they're kind of in semi-hibernation mode. And that's the more typical hypothyroid. No one had occurred to me that I was hypothyroid because I was emaciated. Hypothyroid usually is associated to being big. Now, I had all the other symptoms, digestive issues and constipation and dried skin and being cold and all the other stuff that goes with it, low energy, fatigue. But I was so underweight, no one had thought that I could be hypothyroid. But it turns out if you have low thyroid and high cortisol genetically, and it's quite unusual, I only see it in about 10% of people. If you have that genetically high cortisol, your body refuses to go into hibernation mode. And instead it goes into this hyper-adrenalized mode. And that's exactly how I'd lived my whole life up until that point, I realized. And what I had an extreme version of when I had that issue. As I said, some people, when they have chronic pain, they kind of shut down, right? They kind of disassociate, they go more into the head, but my body's response to the opposite. It went into hyper-adrenalized mode. Oh my God, like this intense anxiety, and I couldn't sleep, and of course, if you have very high adrenaline, then you have reduced appetite. So that also meant that I lost weight, and also it slows down your digestive system, which makes it even worse. So anyway, that's 3 examples. Each of the things I just said were independently verified. These are not, I saw it in a genetic test and assumed it was true. This is, I saw it in a genetic test, and then I did further testing to prove that it was accurate in each case. And I did, and it was. And then resolving it made a massive difference. And this has been a case for me, my wife, my friends, my family members, some of them, all my business partners, some of my employees, basically everyone who's willing to do it. I get them to do this, and we go through it. And again and again, and many clients now as well. I don't know, a couple of hundred at this stage. And I just, because I haven't been doing it that long, this company's quite new. And I just see it over and over again. I see, there's specific tendencies where, and this is where I created my 7-step rejuvenation blueprint, which, you talked about earlier, the rejuvenation, feeling younger thing. And I really developed that during that time of trying all these things and learning about all these things for those few years. And the first step is genetics, though. We don't have to go through all 7 unless you're interested. Yeah. But the first step is genetics. That's the point. Because I feel like you have to understand your blueprint. So all the other stuff people do may be good. Lifestyle changes, reducing stress, sleeping more, exercising, eating right, all of that kind of stuff. But again, eating right, if anyone had seen my diet, they would have said, wow, you're so healthy, right? Never had alcohol, never smoked, never had fast food, never had, anything that people would consider unhealthy. And yet I ended up with like severe problems because of nutrition, right? Where someone else, maybe who was eating McDonald's every day, they might not have developed that problem if they were having, I don't know, an egg in their Mac sandwich or whatever they're having every day, So
I love that, because it shows you the uniqueness of being human and how everything is so relative. Just because someone tells you that that's the way it should be without the blueprint you just talked about, it might not hold value for you.
Yes.
So, let's talk about how one would get their hands on this report that you're talking about. So first, of course, you need to have a DNA test, right?
Yeah. So the way it works is if you've ever done an ancestry type DNA test before. So for me, when I was in this position, I remembered back in 2013, I'd done 23andMe. And there's Ancestry.com and MyHeritage and all those other big companies. If you've ever done one of those before, it's super simple. You can sign up to our service. You can upload your raw data from another platform like that, and you can get your results within a few hours, in most cases, within a day at the most. It's really, really quick. It still takes a few hours at least because there's this vast AI system that's crunching the numbers. A lot of our competitors, literally all they do is just like, they'll look at the data and they go, oh, you have this, that means this. But we don't do that. We go, okay, you have this, but we gotta calculate that against this, and then we gotta come up with a conclusion, right? So that takes a bit of computation, takes a bit of time, but it takes a few hours. So that's the easy way. Now, if you've never done one of those services before, it is more tricky. You can either, again, go off and use one of those other competitive services. It's fine by us, and then take your raw data and use it with us, or just for the sake of simplicity and ease, and maybe also trust, so you're not spreading your data around. When you go to us, you can choose to add a DNA kit when you go to cart, and then we'll ship you that DNA kit. And it's very simple. It's non-intrusive. It's just saliva. So yeah, it's as simple as any kind of test can get. Yeah.
Because I know there's a lot of concern out there when it comes to DNA tests of the data, right? Because now someone has access to all of that. How do you deal with the privacy aspect of it, both from the report, but also if you are the one grabbing the DNA and I'm assuming storing it somewhere?
Yeah. We have to go to a lot of lengths to deal with that, believe me. So I would say this. The one instance where someone could get your data from us, or honestly any other company like us, would be if a government body that had the ability to throw you in jail, kind of threatened to throw you in jail if you didn't hand it over. That would be the situation. And they can just seize stuff as well. The other thing is they can, potentially, even if you do refuse, they can maybe go to the service providers that ultimately hold it, and they can kind of force them again with subpoenas and threats and all the rest of it. So that is a potential danger. How I would say we can compare very favorably to every other company is that even though we have the similar capabilities as a lot of larger companies, and in fact better than most companies, even larger companies, certainly better than, as I just mentioned, those big companies. What we provide in terms of health and wellness is way better than they do. But we are a small company. And so what that means in practice is, for us, only myself and my COO, Jessica, currently still have access to that back end. So we're the only people who would ever be able to access it. If we wanted to access your data, we also literally can't do it without you knowing about it. So like when I see clients and I need to look at their reports, the only way I can do it is either if they give me their password or if I reset their password so I can access it, at which point they get a notification that their password has been reset. So there is no way for even me to access it or anyone to access it without it. Now, so that's in terms of where it's already stored. In terms of like the process of getting it in the first place, the way that the DNA kits are done is when you receive the kit, it's just got a barcode on it. Then in our system, you register that to yourself. But then when the DNA kit is sent off, the lab and all the rest of it, they have no idea who you are. They have no identifying information about you. So all they do is they give the results for this barcode. Then that's transferred to our system, and then our system interprets that barcode is this user that we then have to give the data to. So in terms of the other danger, I guess, is hacking. In that regard, we do everything that we're supposed to do. We do 2FA and all the rest of it. But I think, even though I think most people won't understand this immediately, the biggest issue is the one I started with, which is how many people have access. I think when the leaks happen with, whatever, I won't disparage anyone, but the things that you may have heard of in the news or whatever, it's always a company where thousands of people have back-end access to things, which is often necessary because customer service people have to be able to log in, they have to be able to check, and you're like, oh, this doesn't work. They have to be able to go in there and do that. But because we're a small company and we'll keep it this way as long as we can, and even when we do, we plan to have a shareholder in the company who then we also give access to, not just someone who's being paid $15 an hour, which is the usual customer service employee, so that we know that the only people who have access to that data have an inherent stake in making sure that they protect the data because they're trying to protect the company, because it is in fact their company, rather than just giving the data out to anyone who you've hired. Yeah,
makes sense. No, I love that. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's really important for, I would imagine, many people concerned with security. Now, if we go back to the reports you draw up and what you've seen, so personally I don't have any allergies, but I have people in my life that have allergies, but a lot of them were developed later in life.
Mm-hmm.
How much can we tell from the DNA, so the reports you do on what you might be prone to become allergic to? Or is there like a difference between like, for sure you're going to get this allergy, to maybe if you don't follow A, B, and C, you're going to get this allergy?
So everything is risk scores. We can never give a binary. The usual thing in the health world is you have to have a disclaimer on there saying, an FDA disclaimer is called, this product cannot cure, prevent, diagnose, I think there's one more thing, any disease. So we're the same. We can't do any of those. But the one thing that we can do, we can't diagnose, but we can help you mitigate risk. So we can help you reduce your risk of having something. That's something that we can say that most people can't, because we have enough science behind it. And so Yeah, so nothing is certain. However, to answer your question about allergies, here's where I find the information very useful for allergies. So I told you, back a few years ago, I had a situation where almost anything I ate would give me pain.
Yes.
But I noticed there were a few foods that weren't as bad. And so I jumped to the conclusion, which I think is quite natural, to go, well, I must have all these food allergies and food intolerances. This food gives me pain. That food gives me pain. This food gives me gas. This food gives me reflux. Maybe I guess I'm intolerant to all these foods. And this is very common these days, right? A lot of people these days think they have issues with gluten and whatever. And then when I got my DNA test results back before I'd resolved my digestive issues, it said I had almost no food intolerances or allergies. And I was like, well, that's not accurate then, because yes, I do,
Yeah.
But then as I started to work out what was actually going on, like I gave you 3 examples, and started resolving those things, then most of those issues with food started going away. And so what I realized is I didn't have allergies and intolerances. What I actually had, I haven't even got into this yet, but I had also SIBO, which is a intestinal overgrowth, a bacterial overgrowth in the intestine of pathogenic organisms, which is kind of natural when your thyroid isn't working properly and your bile isn't flowing and all the rest of it. And, I kind of addressed that and dealt with the root causes. Anyway, as I started to deal with that, I started to feel fine. I realized I didn't have an allergy. I just got pain when I would eat something that would feed this bad bacteria. That's all. That's not the same thing, right? But it can, but it can seem the same, because when we get ill, let's say if you get a cold, most people don't know this, but if you were to get a cold virus, and if I could wave a magic wand over you and make your immune system disappear, you would get ill and die, but you would have no symptoms of having a cold. So all the actual symptoms of having a cold come from your immune system. The headache, the swelling, the runny nose, the coughing, all of that, the raised temperature, all of that is your own immune system, not the virus itself. And so I say that to say the response of your immune system to an actual pathogen versus the response of your immune system to an allergen are almost indistinguishable. Right? You don't know if you're reacting to the food, or you don't know if you're reacting to an organism that's eating the food. Like the results are pretty much the same. So how is it useful then if it can be inaccurate? It's useful to me because it can tell me, does the person who has an issue with this food, is there a genetic basis for the issue they have with the food? If you have a genetic basis for it, then the good news, I guess, is that it validates, okay, you're not crazy. There really is a problem with this food. But the bad news is you're probably never going to, or not just food, it could be grass pollen or whatever it might be, cat hair. The bad news is you're probably never going to be 100% okay with that thing. Like, your immune system is always going to have some degree of reaction to that. Now, the healthier you get, the lesser reaction you can have, but still, it'll probably never be totally fine. Whereas if you get the genetic report and it shows you do not have any genetic basis for an allergy or intolerance, the bad news is it doesn't give you an answer as to why you have the feeling, although I've looked at other reports for that, like, for instance, the SIBO report I was just talking about. But the good news is it does tell you, if you resolve what the real issue is, then there's no genetic basis for it, and you should be able to totally eat that food fine again. And so that has been my experience with, I wouldn't say many, but several people. They realize they don't have an issue with it. They resolve whatever the actual underlying digestive issue is. A lot of the time it is some kind of underlying infection. That's something that's very much underdiagnosed, but they're starting to realize. Used to be IBS, IBD, colitis, all this stuff. They used to think it's something else. Now they're realizing often it's a pathogen. It's just that it's very hard to measure the small intestine. If it's a large intestine, they put colonoscopy out there. If it's the stomach of the duodenum, they put an endoscopy down there. But the small intestine is right in the middle. It's like this really long tube with 150 corners. Like, how on earth do you see what's going on in there? So the best that they come up with now is they do these breath tests where you breathe into a thing, and then if you have a certain gas, they tells you have an overgrowth of bacteria. But it's still quite an early science. And as I said, maybe 20 years ago, modern medicine didn't know about it. Now they're starting to. And so, yeah, I'd say, often it can be something like that, or it could be something else. Like, it could be a toxin. So if you have a large amount of a toxin, whether it's a pesticide or a heavy metal or mold or something like that, that can set off your immune system. And then you think it's the food or whatever, but actually it's something else. It's something environmental or whatever. So, yeah. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. It fascinates me, right? The complexity of being human, which we all know, but sometimes we don't actually understand how deep it actually goes. And you touched on this earlier, which I want to reemphasize the idea of what you do is what I would call a holistic approach, not just taking things in isolation, meaning like, oh, if this gene is on, it means this, because nothing works on its own, right? And you've done such a good job of explaining and showing us examples of that. And I love that aspect of it. What would you say, if you were to look back, what fascinated you the most in the work you're doing right now in being able to correlate different things and seeing how intricate the connections are? Some things that maybe people don't even realize and might be important.
Yeah. What's the question? What interested me most?
So, no. What intrigued you the most? Like something that's like, oh my God, I didn't even think that this was possible.
Oh, yeah. I can give you an example of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm actually amazed how important amino acids are. Specific amino acids. The only people who really talk or think about amino acids, I think, are like bodybuilders or sports people. But of course, like they're the primary building block that most of us are made out of. Most of us are made out of, flesh, which is protein, right? And I have observed that when a person has an increased need for specific amino acids, I already know what their symptoms are going to be. So if I have someone with an increased need for glycine, I already know they've got anxiety, and I already know they're going to have skin problems, and I already know they're going to have joint problems. If I see someone with low levels of tyrosine, I already know they're going to have an issue focusing. I already know they're probably going to have underactive thyroid and low energy. If I see someone with low levels of lysine, I already know they're going to have an under-functioning immune system, and they're going to have either chronic infections or like allergies or intolerances or both. So, this is like a couple of examples. You never would have guessed. I had someone interview me a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago now, and she was the first person I met who was like, oh yeah, I've noticed those patterns as well. I was like, I'm not the only one then. So that's good. But she hadn't done it with the genes. She'd only done it with blood tests. And I said, yeah, but it's fascinating to me. I see the genes, but then if the person can afford it, I really strongly encourage them to get blood tests too, to confirm it. So we're not just going off what the genes say and what I say. So because if you see it once, you might believe it. If you also hear someone say it who you believe, that really helps. But if you see it with a completely different test, then you really believe it, right? So it really makes you actually do it. So how important these amino acids are for our quality of life. I mean, one example, a guy I literally spoke to earlier today, I filmed a case study video of him, which he volunteered for very kindly. And he volunteered because he was just so blown away. He told me he's around 60. He'd had extreme anxiety for 40 years. Not quite agoraphobic, but close. Like, try and avoid leaving the house, certainly avoid public places, all that kind of stuff. Really limited his quality of life. Otherwise, a very great guy, very high intelligence, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, he tried so much stuff. He had tried, he said he spent over $250,000 on therapy in his life. He'd done all kinds of other stuff, meditation, breath work, spiritual practice, psychedelics, healing retreats, all of this kind of stuff you probably talk about on this podcast sometimes. Yeah. And he said, all of it had brought some value to him, and he'd learned something, and all the rest. Again, he wasn't like negative about any of it, but he said, I saw in his genetics, he had a genetic need for more glycine, more proline, which is another amino acid similar to glycine. And then also a genetic tendency to have low DHT, which is a specific hormone. And it's a masculine hormone, and it's the hormone that's the most calming. So the most anxiety reducing. So I hadn't had a chance to do a lot with him yet. All I did is get him on a couple of supplements for that particular neurotransmitter, glycine, and then a couple of supplements to increase his DHT. And he said, this is the first thing that's reduced, like, basically made my anxiety mostly disappear in 40 plus years. Like, it's 85% gone. That was his estimation, the anxiety. He said after barely being able to leave the house, he now been to 3 huge concerts and not had any anxiety, like being surrounded by thousands of screaming people. He said his brain fog was 95% gone. Like, he could sleep through the night, like all of this stuff. And I don't say this to say like, oh, I'm amazing, I created that. No, it's like, I could have easily missed that glycine was the thing he needed to calm him down, and DHT. Neither of these are like the first go-to things for like a nutritionist or a functional medicine doctor or whatever. The only reason I saw it is because I had access to his genetics and I could see that he had that need for it. And so, things like that, to me, that's what I'm most passionate about, like how it can. And again, if you're listening to this and you have had anxiety for 40 years, I'm not saying glycine will work for you. That's not the moral of the story. The moral,
Yes.
the moral that glycine may make you worse. In fact, it does to some people. Like, the moral of the story is not that this thing works. The moral of the story is like finding out the one thing that you may, if especially if you've suffered from something for a long time and nothing's worked, or nothing's worked for very long, finding out that missing, like, weakest link, that puzzle piece, that that's very, very that's very rewarding to me when it works, and people tell me it's changed their lives.
Yeah, and I love that. And I mean, again, I will emphasize the other point you brought up, and I brought up as well, is the uniqueness of each of us. So, like you
Yes.
said, yeah, for this person, he had to take these things and he made it better. For you, he might not.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important to actually have that blueprint to begin with, because then you know exactly what you might want to test further for, like you said, to get confirmation, and then take action accordingly.
Yes.
So, in the example that you just gave us, you said, okay, you saw that he had a predisposition or a risk to be lower in those hormones or
hormones and nutrients. Yeah.
Or the nutrients. Yeah. Then does your report then make suggestions on how to supplement for those nutrients?
Yes.
Or those hormones? Okay, so that comes out as part of it. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, the glycine is quite obvious. It's basically either take glycine as a supplement or foods that are higher in glycine, like connective tissue. By the way, this is quite a broad one, so I'll speak on it for a sec if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Most people still eat meat, right? Most people aren't vegetarians or vegans, but most, especially in the Western world, the only kind of meat they eat is muscle meat, like flesh. But most of our ancestors, and in fact, in many cultures throughout the world still, they eat a lot of connective tissue meat, right? Probably in Romania still, I believe, right?
Exactly. That's how I grew up with that.
Yeah. So that connective tissue meat is way, way higher in anti-inflammatory amino acids like glycine and proline that are also very calming, whereas muscle meat is more high in other amino acids like methionine, cysteine, and tryptophan, which are actually inflammatory and potentially even anxiety inducing if they're in excess. So I'm not against meat. I think meat is great as long as, again, it suits your genetics. But having only ever muscle meat and never having connective tissue meat is imbalancing in itself. And so while it was more imbalancing for this guy than average because of his genetics, for everyone, you'd be better off either having more connective tissue meat along with your muscle meat, or having some kind of supplement, like collagen supplements are quite popular these days. And glycine is a very fun supplement. I mean, literally, if you buy it, it's pretty cheap. It's $10 a pound or something. It's a white powder. It looks like sugar. It tastes like sugar. It's 2/3 of the strength of sugar. And yet it has 0 carbs. It's just amino acids. So glycine is kind of an interesting supplement anyway, honestly, and something that a lot of people would probably benefit from. But it's not necessarily going to change your life like it did with this guy.
Absolutely. I love that example. Alwen, this was fascinating. I mean, I have so many more questions, and I feel like we'll need to bring you back for a second part to go even deeper. I'm curious now. I know before we jumped live, we were talking about your website, and people will have a chance to go sign up for this and get a small discount as well. Do you want to tell us where people can go and find all this information, get a DNA kit if they want one, or even get the genetics should they have the DNA kit already?
Yes, yeah. If you go to geneticinsights.co, that's genetic insights plural.co, not .com, .co, geneticinsights.co. Then if you use the code Constantine, spelled exactly as yours is without the E at the end, Constantine, then you can get 25% off. I'll just talk quickly why I created my company.
Yeah, of course.
If that's okay, 30 seconds.
Absolutely, please do, yeah.
So, as I said, this other company helped me, so why create my own? Basically, because while the other company that helped me was great, it was very much of a level of complexity that was suitable for a practitioner. It was not something that was really easily used by the average person. And it was also priced at that level. And so my mission with my company is really to bring information that's just as accurate and helpful as that, but at a much lower price and much simpler as well. And so that's what Genetic Insights is. So our price point At the very highest, we're talking about $197. At the lowest, we're talking about $45. That depends if you just want like one collection or if you want like access to everything forever. But everything forever, the very most is $197. But I'm happy to offer that coupon code we just talked about, Constantine, which is 25% off. So we're talking about less than $150 as a total cost ever, which is very, very affordable within this space for the quality of what you're getting.
Yeah,
in fact, dollar per information, helpful information. And I'm a big fan of other testing, like we talked about, different blood testing and urine testing and all the rest of it. But it gives even if I didn't have this company, it would still be the first test that I wanted because you get me so much information for so little cost. I think it's very good value in that sense.
I was going to say, I mean, that sounds like a steal, right? Because based on everything you've shared and some of my own knowledge, just having access to that raw information, then you can build upon and do further testing. I mean, that's invaluable. That's amazing. Oh, that's awesome. Okay, I will make sure those links will be in the show notes for everyone listening, the coupon code as well. And Alwen, I just want to thank you so much for being on the show, for being so engaging and the beautiful stories. So I'm so excited. And I know I'll be trying this out myself because I need to know more.
Fantastic. Well, if you'd like to have me on and talk about what your experience was, that's always my favorite. I'm happy to talk about that.
That's what I was actually thinking. I was going to say, hey, we'll get you back with my results and be like, okay, let's dive into it. And then we'll be able to debunk anything if it needs to be debunked. But I have a feeling that's not going to be much.
I think the main thing is just if you're willing to, it is almost like, sharing your soul. So to do it publicly, not everyone's willing to do it.
Exactly.
When I first got my results, I almost felt like going to like a psychic or something because it knew so much about me. I was like, oh my God. And I'm quite a transparent person, but not everyone is. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, on this show, we are very transparent. So we'll see if we need to keep anything private, we keep it private. But otherwise, we'll share to help as many people on this journey as possible. With that being said, I want to thank you so much and we'll be in touch.
Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration of personal transformation. Your presence and engagement are at the heart of what we do, and I sincerely appreciate you, your time, and thirst for knowledge, inspiration, and empowerment. Please consider showing your support by hitting like, subscribe, leaving a comment, or writing a review. Your engagement not only fuels our mission, but also helps others discover these insights. For more daily guidance on personal transformation across the mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical realms, be sure to visit our website at unleashthyself.com. You can also find us on Instagram at UnleashThyselfToday, TikTok and YouTube at Unleash Thyself, and there we post daily content designed to inspire and empower you on your journey. If you have any specific thoughts, questions, or feedback, I truly value your input. I would love to hear from you. Together, we're building a community united in authenticity and purpose. Once again, thank you for being a part of this movement. Until next time, continue to embrace your true self and live a life on purpose, with purpose. See you in the next episode.